With Monster Hunter Wilds on the horizon, we're going back to Monster Hunter World to relive some of the best builds and hunts in the game. So with that, I'm Darcblade with one of the greatest builds for the bow in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now each episode is dedicated to just one build and are slightly different from the best of the best builds. They tend to specialise in certain aspects that were skipped over in the best of the best builds, or are slightly edited versions of the builds that were featured in those videos. But if you find these videos helpful or informative, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it allows me to make more content like this, not only for Monster Hunter World, but also for the upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds. In today's video, we are going to be looking at the best general purpose raw build for the bow. Now the bow may be a master of elements, but sometimes monsters don't have the best elemental hit zones, and so you'll want to go for a raw bow build. And this is what this build is all about. Now I have done a raw attack best of the best bow build before, but since making that video, I have changed my opinion and the build slightly, which allows for this build to deal more damage. On top of that, it has some bow quality of life skills, but it does lack a little bit when it comes to defense. So for this, you'll need the Rhymeguard Helm Gamma, the Dragon Hide Beta, the Dragon Claws Beta, the Dragon Barbs Alpha, the Dragon Feet Beta, and the Challenger Charm. As for your bow, I've gone for the Bow of Vice and Violence, which is the Vitalis bow. This has an attack increase augmentation and a health regen augmentation attached to it. And then finally, for your mantles and specialist tools, these are down to personal preference. I've gone for a evasion mantle here and temporal mantle. The main reason we've gone for the Vitalis bow is we are going for as much raw attack as possible. Simple as. It does suck a little bit that we have to deal with negative affinity, but it shouldn't matter in the long run thanks to this bow's raw damage output. Now as for the decorations, you've got tons to play around with. So first of all, I've gone for Challenger Jewels to max out the Agitator skill, Attack Jewels to max out the Attack Boost skill, Expert Jewels to max out Critical Eye, Refresh Jewels to max out the Stamina Surge skill, a Jumping Jewel for a point in Evade Extender, Critical Jewels to max out Crit Boost, Evasion Jewels to max out Evade Window, the Mighty Bow Jewel, which is an absolute must for the bow to give us a point in Bow Charge Plus, a Spread Jewel for a point in Power Shots, a 4-shot Jewel for a point in the Normal Shot skill, Physique Jewels to get Constitution to level 3, and then finally a Resistor Jewel for a point in Blight Resistance. As you can see, some of these are quality of life. You can replace the Refresh Jewels entirely if you want to. Same with the Jumping Jewel and the Evade Extender skill, as well as the Resistor decoration if you wanted to. As for the decoration in the mantles, these are down to personal preference again. I've gone for Destroyer Jewels and Dragon Jewels. So if you've done what I've done here, you have a build with 200 health and 200 stamina, regardless of if you've taken your food buffs or not. This is thanks to the Vitalis set bonus, but we'll talk about that later. You'll also have a raw attack of 493, which can be higher when certain buffs like Agitator kick in. You'll also have 15% base affinity, which can be 85% when you take into account weakness exploit and the Agitator buff. It would have been nice to get this to 100, but 85% is still an impressive number combined with the high raw attack this build has. You have a dragon rating of 120. Now this build does have an element, but this build isn't focused around dealing elemental damage, but having a little bit of extra dragon attack is nice. You also have high Elder Seal, which is great for Elder Dragons, and finally you have access to all the coatings except for the Blast coating. As for your defense, you have a strong defense of 1121 that is strong against water, thunder and ice, but unfortunately weak to fire and especially dragon. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have attack boost at level 7, increasing the raw attack of this build, and at level 4 or above grants us a bonus 5% affinity. You'll then have Critical Eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build again. You'll then have Agitator at level 7, a wonderful skill for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Basically, when a monster becomes enraged, Agitator will kick in, granting us bonus raw attack and base affinity. And as you can easily control when a monster becomes enraged in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, thanks to the whole Clutch Claw and Flint Shot mechanic, you can have the Agitator buff active almost on demand. You'll then have Evade Window at level 5, increasing the invincibility frames when we dodge and evade and such. This is our key survival skill, to be honest. And at level 5 we can often dodge into or through attacks without getting hit. You'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our attacks when they crit a monster, but only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. But as this build is all about raw attack, this skill works nicely with this build. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3, a skill that when you're attacking monster weak points grants you bonus affinity. This can be up to 30%, however should this weak point be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this can be up to 50% bonus affinity. You'll then have Constitution at level 3. This reduces the stamina cost of certain moves such as evading and, well, ultimately shooting the bow. Now, some people may wonder why you didn't get it to level 5. Well, that is because if you combine Constitution with Dash Juice as well as the Black Belt Feline Canteen skill, it'll give you the equivalent as if you had Constitution at level 5. And there is a limit to how Constitution and these other skills stack. Next up is Stamina Surge at level 3. Stamina Surge is a skill that allows us to more quickly restore our stamina. You'll then have Coalescence at level 3. One of the main differences between this build and the original best of the best raw attack bow build. Coalescence is a skill that when we remove a blight or other abnormal status from our hunter, will gain increased raw attack, elemental attack, and status build up, ultimately allowing us to potentially deal more damage. And ultimately I've taken this because a lot of endgame monsters rely on blights and other elements, so we can often activate this skill. You then have Blight Resistance at level 1, which is an optional skill, but Blight Resistance reduces the duration of elemental blights by 50%, at least at level 1. This works in unison with Coalescence, as it means that we don't always have to sheathe our weapon and take a null berry to remove a blight, as running around a little bit on our own will cause it to wear off naturally, thus kicking in Coalescence without sheathing our weapon. You'll then have normal shots at level 1, increasing the raw attack damage of our normal arrows. This is basically shots performed with the right trigger or R2. You then have power shots at level 1, which increases the raw attack damage of our power shots, so shots performed with B or circle. You then have resuscitate at level 1, a byproduct of the armor, but it's still useful. It's a useful survival skill, but it is wasted a little bit thanks to this build having evade window at level 5. Basically, when we get inflicted by a blight or abnormal status, we'll gain increased invincibility frames and reduce stamina depletion. You then have evade extender at level 1, increasing the distance at which we evade and dodge. This is a quality of life skill. You don't have to take this if you don't want to, but against some of the harder fights, with the bow being such a fragile weapon, this adds to our defense in a small way. You then have Bow Charge Plus at level 1, increasing the maximum bow charge level by 1, ultimately allowing our shots to charge up to level 4, thus allowing us to deal the most amount of damage. Finally, thanks to the mantles, you'll have Dragon Attack at level 2, increasing the dragon damage and rating of this build. And then finally you'll have Part Breaker at level 2 as well, helping us break monster body parts more easily when we're wearing the associated mantle. Now, as for the set bonuses, you'll have 2 of them, both attached to the Fatalis Legend for wearing 4 pieces of the Fatalis armor. For wearing 2 pieces of the armor set, you'll get the Inheritance bonus, which removes the cap on certain skills. Basically, this allows us to get agitated to level 7 instead of just level 5. And then finally, for 4 pieces, you'll have the Transcendence bonus, which grants us 2 bonuses. First of all, it allows our health and stamina to be at 200, regardless of if we've eaten food at the canteen or not. And on top of that, we'll also gain the True Spare Shot skill, meaning that our shots that use coatings have a chance of not consuming that said coating, allowing us to conserve our ammunition a little bit better. And so, there we have it. That's the general purpose raw attack bow build version 2.0. But every build out there, even the best of the best builds, they all come with various pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to this raw attack bow build, the biggest pro is its raw attack damage. Able to bring down monsters quite quickly thanks to the high raw attack it has. Which links to the second pro, which this build can be used against any monster regardless of their elemental resistances. And then finally for the pros is that this build has quite a few quality of life skills, at least for the bow. It has a lot of stamina based skills as well as evasion skills, which not only help manage our stamina, but also helps a little bit when it comes to defense. But there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is, yes, unfortunately, apart from evade window, we are lacking in defensive skills. There will be times, should you take a hit from a monster, that you will feel it with this build. The lack of any resistances, Divine Blessing, and more could be an issue for some players. And the final con for this build is, unfortunately, there is one monster that this build probably won't work that well against, and that is Alatreon. This is because Alatreon needs elemental builds to take it down effectively, and this build is lacking when it comes to dealing elemental damage, so that is something to be aware of. But there we have it, that is the general purpose raw attack bow build, version 2.0. Like I said, this build is all about dealing raw damage to monsters. It is a high DPS build, but that being said, it can be surpassed should you invest in elements and counter the monster with the correct element. The main reason you may not want to invest in elemental builds though, is there are a few handful of monsters such as Fatalis, Runa Gigante, where elements are still not the best against them, and raw attack can surpass those builds. The other reason being if you don't like to change your build every 5 seconds. Say you're in the Guided Lands, or you're doing a multi-monster hunt, and you don't want to change your bow build all the time, then this build could be a great option for you. It's strong, able to deal damage, has some quality of life when it comes to stamina and evasion, and can be used to bring down monsters quite quickly. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you some of the greatest builds, this time for the bow, in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.